the air with new fallout from former President Trump's historic not guilty plea, with Attorney General Merrick Garland defending the special counsel, and a new poll just out showing Mr. Trump still way out front with Republicans. What our sources are saying tonight about what's happening around the former president and why his former vice president is catching heat from one host on pardons. Plus, millions of Americans right now facing down the threat of dangerous tornadoes rolling through the South as we speak. We'll take a live look at who's in the path tonight. Then, in just the last couple hours, a new study is showing a drug that's supposed to help people with ADHD actually hurts the productivity of people who don't. So why are those people who don't have ADHD taking it in the first place? And in tonight's backstory, we're going behind the scenes of an NBC News exclusive. What exactly happened in the seconds before Tom Costello's live shot right here? We're going to pull back the curtain and fill you in. Plus, in tonight's original, why fans of the Oakland A's are protesting their team's planned move to Las Vegas by packing the stadium. Powerful scenes from a reverse boycott later on in the show tonight. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and tonight we are now getting the first comments from the Attorney General since former President Trump pleaded not guilty to those 37 federal charges down in Miami Tuesday. You've got Merrick Garland now backing up his special counsel, Jack Smith, as the Justice Department is facing a slew of attacks from Republicans who say the DOJ has been weaponized, is becoming two-tiered. Listen.
When I appointed Mr. Smith, I did so because it underscores the Justice Department's commitment to both independence and accountability. Mr. Smith is a veteran career prosecutor.
Another first tonight, a look at how voters, right, a snapshot at how voters are feeling about this indictment for the former president. Of course, faced with allegations he mishandled classified documents and didn't return them when he was supposed to. This new survey shows nearly no change, down about 3% since the charges came out, still inside the margin of error. Comes as our sources are telling us that Mr. Trump is trying to stay calm and upbeat after the hearing, the arraignment yesterday, cheering his staff for how they stage managed everything that went down Tuesday, like at Bedminster. They're also telling us that he will probably defend himself by saying he truly believed he was allowed to hold on to these documents in question. On the campaign front, sources say this isn't going to slow this down, that he plans to get out there, keep hitting the trail. And maybe most importantly for Mr. Trump, he's satisfied that the news around him seems to have sucked all the oxygen away from his Republican rivals. NBC's Garrett Hake is live for us in Bedminster, New Jersey. That is where the former president is. Listen, nothing on his schedule for a few days. We got a kind of a look at some fundraising numbers, but certainly not the trumpet tooting that we saw the last time around. And we've laid out where his head is at this moment. Talk us through where things stand today and what we should expect in the days to come.
Well, look, I think today is the Department of Justice revenge day a little bit, with Merrick Garland being the one behind the microphone talking, as you just played, about Jack Smith and the integrity and the professionalism of his team. They needed to do that. Donald Trump's been hammering away at the special counsel over and over and over again, including at that speech in Bedminster last night, getting, really personal terms going after Smith and his wife. So a little bit of brushback from the DOJ and not much else from Donald Trump here tonight. You pointed out those fundraising numbers. The campaign, leaking that they had raised $2 million at the fundraiser last night. I think that's interesting. This is a pre-planned fundraiser. This was not something that they threw together just because of the indictment. It was supposed to mark Donald Trump's birthday, which is today. We've not seen them really going out of their way to tout fundraising numbers like they did last time, where within a week of the indictment, the former president had raised $12 million. So, Hallie, it may be a little bit of an opportunity for the former president to catch his breath, perhaps catch up with the legal team today and try to plot a path forward. They like kind of where they are and how they got, certainly buoyed by the poll numbers that you mentioned that show him still with a commanding lead. But in terms of next steps, it's a little bit of a wait and see.
What's also part of the next steps process, Garrett, is the way that the Republican opponents going up against the former president for the White House are going to be put on the spot again and again about the indictment of Donald Trump, right, about these federal charges.
Yeah.
Mike Pence got that today in what was a kind of spicy exchange with the radio show host on this issue of whether or not the former vice president would pardon, if elected, his former boss. I want to play a little bit of it, then I want you to talk about it.
I take the pardon authority very seriously. It's an enormously important power of someone in an executive position. And I just think it's premature to have any conversation about that right now, guys.
It's what came next in this interview, Garrett, that is illustrating, I think, the way that, as Donald Trump's sort of people around him put it to you and to others, they are in some ways stage managing the narrative as it relates to the GOP primary.
Yeah, that's right. This idea of pardoning Trump has become something of a litmus test on the right. And you saw Vivek Ramaswamy, the candidate who's kind of been basically a stalking horse for Donald Trump throughout this race so far, being the first one to come out and say he would definitely do so. Then Nikki Haley, who's taken 3 or 4 different shades of positions on the indictment overall, the latest version saying that she would be kind of theoretically open to the idea of a pardon. She would be predisposed towards it because she doesn't want to see Donald Trump wind up in jail. And then you've got Pence here, who's tried to stake out a more nuanced position on the indictment overall. Remember, it was just this morning that he came out and said, or I guess last night in an interview with the Wall Street Journal that was published this morning, that he had actually read the full text of the indictment. And oh, by the way, he thought it was serious. But listen to how he gets pressed on this in that same radio show when he was trying to kind of keep his options open here to just let the legal process play out.
But what I'm hearing is you're fine with Donald Trump being put in prison, sir. And that, to me, since you were his vice president, feels pretty disrespectful.
I had a standard rule. I don't talk about hypotheticals. Look, we don't know what the president's defense here is. I think he's entitled to make his defense, entitled to have his day in court.
Hallie, Mike Pence is one of the most on-message people I think you or I both have probably ever interviewed. It's the same here. He really doesn't like to talk about hypotheticals, and he's trying to sort of stake out this ground here that the legal process has to play out, which is also a convenient way of saying, I don't want to be asked about this every day, but he's clearly going to be.
Bring it back here to Washington, because we've got some new reporting over in the other beat that you cover, which is the Capitol, that only one of 18 House members who were in these competitive districts that were won by President Biden back in 2020, have actually said anything about the indictment. You know, you had Don Bacon saying it's obvious what the president did was wrong. He had some pretty strong words. The other 17 didn't really respond here. What do you read into that?
Well, same as it ever was, to quote the talking heads here, Hallie. I mean, the problem for all of these Republicans is what you need to do to win in a Republican primary right now is be Trumpy enough, even in a district where Donald Trump did not win the general election. So you need to have his base behind you to win in a primary, and then you basically need to try to very gently turn your back on those people to win in a general election. And so if you're one of those 18, the best thing you can do right now is say nothing, because there's no good answer that's going to make both of those camps happy. Donald Trump is the most polarizing politician since Richard Nixon. This issue is probably the most polarizing issue since January 6th. And it's a problem for everyone who's trying to thread that needle in a battleground district or state.
Especially, Garrett, and I'll be quick here, when the new polling that's out today shows in this early snapshot, and again, it is early here, really is not moving the needle.
No, it certainly doesn't seem to be. I mean, the most important issue for Republican voters remains the economy. It's the most important issue for voters across the board. I don't even know how you poll this question, to be honest, because when you start talking about corruption or reform of the DOJ, I mean, you could pick the way you want to describe this, Hallie, and it's code words for different sides. And so it's really hard, I think, to get a sense of how much this issue is going to move the needle, at least in this very early stage.
Garrett Hake live for us there in Bedminster. Garrett, thank you much. We want to get to some breaking news now, because parts of Georgia, we understand, as we speak, wow, look at that, under an active tornado warning. There are really bad thunderstorms. Something like 30 million people are at risk. What you're looking at is actually in Alabama. That was a funnel cloud in the southeast part of the state. We've already seen 6 reported tornadoes today alone. Obviously, a lot of damage. You can see the roof of that house torn off, some of the siding, it looks like, too. We're just finding out one woman has been hospitalized in Alabama. Office buildings are gone. There's one where the ceiling is ripped off. The outside wall is like on the ground there. Some areas are facing what's known as this rare, I'm going to quote here, particularly dangerous situation. That's the designation. Look at this hail. Looks like golf balls coming down. There's winds at maybe hurricane speeds. You go a little further west to Texas, very dangerous heat. Alerts from Waco down to Brownsville. We're talking temperatures of 115 or even higher in some spots. With concerns about what this is going to do to the electric grid. Think about it. Everybody's running their air conditioning. Can the system take it? I want to get to meteorologist Bill Cairns. What are you tracking now, Bill? What are you seeing?
It's all about the dangerous winds and possibility of tornadoes in the south. That's the most life-threatening situation we have. You know, we get strong thunderstorms and sometimes severe that are racing really fast. It's a dangerous situation. So you were mentioning that PDS tornado watch. PDS, particularly dangerous situation. We get them when we're going to have big tornado outbreaks, but occasionally we can get them when we expect really dangerous high winds from thunderstorms, like hurricane gusts that are possible. So that's this area right here that includes Jackson, Mississippi, Starkville, southwards down almost to Macomb. This will probably be extended southwards with the next watch when it comes out in about an hour or two. So far, it hasn't been too bad. What we're concerned with, at least the potential, is for a derecho. A derecho was when we get a long duration, severe wind event over 200 miles of 200 miles of damage. We haven't had that yet, but that's the potential, at least in the atmosphere. We've also had numerous tornado watches in southern portions of Georgia, including Waycross to Savannah, just north of Jacksonville. This is the area where we've had a few tornadoes reported during the day. Say those pictures we showed you there from Abbeville, that was located right here with these tornadoes. And we've had a couple since then near Albany, Georgia. No significant damage with those besides the one we showed you the pictures. Everywhere you see with the blue and the white, that's large hail and also wind damage. We've had reports of a 5-inch hailstone, which would be tied the state record in Mississippi. And you mentioned we do have one tornado warning. This is Albany, Georgia, and this is Bridgeport, and this is Sylvester. So again, still continuing at this hour, Hallie. We'll continue to track this all night.
Well, we're going to be talking to you again, I am sure, in the next little bit here, Bill. Don't go too far. Thank you. Let's get to some developing news on the economy, too, because we've got word from the Fed. They're pressing pause for now on those interest rate hikes. It's the first time they're doing that in more than a year. So instead of raising rates, they're leaving things where they are, right? They're going to wait on increasing it for the 11th straight time. But it doesn't mean that's what you're going to see for the rest of the year. There's a projection of a couple of more rate hikes. Listen to what Fed Chair Jay Powell just said not too long ago.
Looking ahead, nearly all committee participants view it as likely that some further rate increases will be appropriate this year to bring inflation down to 2% over time.
This comes as the inflation rate is now down to 4%. We talked to you about that yesterday, the lowest it's been in 2 years. Gas is cheaper, used cars even getting a little bit cheaper too. Shaq Brewster is live for us out at a grocery store in Chicago because, Shaq, eggs are getting cheaper as well. Talk about this move from the Fed and what it means for people, you know, living their lives like you and the people that you're seeing at the store.
Well, let's be honest here. For folks who are going around the grocery store now, filling up their cart, going to the checkout lane, this Fed decision is not going to determine how much they pay when they come to grocery stores like the one I'm at right now. But when you look at how they feel about those prices and what they see in those prices, yes, that can determine future rate moves and rate adjustments by the Fed. And that is what I've been trying to get a sense of as I've been talking to people here. You see that headline, that inflation is at its lowest rate since March of 2021. Well, when you talk to folks about how they feel about that and whether or not they're feeling that improvement, they're not really there just yet. Listen to some of the conversations I had. They're saying that inflation is easing. Do you feel that?
No, not at all. What you could take $200 and get now, it takes almost $400 when you're shopping.
There's a little level out now, but the food is, some of the food is ridiculous.
And look, that's largely because when you're talking about inflation, you're still talking about prices going up. But you saw from that report yesterday that not all prices are going up. There are some glimmers of hope. You mentioned eggs. They had the biggest monthly drop in decades, down about 13%. Bacon down about 7%. Milk down about 3.5%. So depending on what you put in your grocery, in your bin, that can mean you feel better about things. But overall, it's still that mixed picture and mixed feelings from shoppers, Hallie.
Shaq Brewster live for us there. Shaq, good luck with your grocery list as well. Appreciate it. Tonight, some other developing news. We are learning that one of the biggest religious groups, organizations in the country, the Southern Baptist Convention, is moving to ban women from most leadership position in its churches after also overwhelmingly voting to expel 2 of its churches for having women pastors. You're getting a live look now at the Southern Baptist Convention's annual meeting in Louisiana. Remember, this is the country's biggest Protestant denomination. Here's what we know already. More than 10,000 members of the Southern Baptist Convention have voted by a 9-to-1 margin, right? So overwhelming vote to go ahead and confirm the exit of a couple of churches in California, a smaller congregation in Kentucky, both of which were led by women. The pastor in Kentucky had led her church for 3 decades. The Southern Baptist Convention putting out a statement today saying in part the church in Kentucky was, and I'm quoting here, not in friendly cooperation with the SBC because Scripture, quote, reserves the office of pastor for men. Aaron Gilchrist is here to break it all down for us. This is significant. This is newsworthy, Aaron, in a big way, because this is obviously a huge denomination in this country. And this is a huge and significant move for not just those 2 churches, but potentially a lot.
Yeah, for sure. 13 million members in this church across the United States. And for these 2 particular churches, the decision was made by the Executive Committee of the Southern Baptist Convention back in February to remove Saddleback Church in California and Fern Creek Baptist in Louisville, Kentucky, from membership in the Southern Baptist Convention because in the case of Saddleback, there were 3 women who were elevated to roles that gave them the title of pastor. They weren't the senior lead pastor, but they were in these jobs that gave them the title of pastor. And in the case of the church in Louisville, the woman that you mentioned had led that church for 3 decades. And so the church said that they were not in friendly cooperation, meaning they're going to be kicked out of the Southern Baptist Convention because they continued to have women in these roles. And we actually heard from the president of the Southern Baptist Convention earlier this afternoon, sort of walking the media through how that decision came to be, how they decided that these 2 churches in particular, along with a couple of others actually that had women in leadership roles, were going to be kicked out, basically.
Linda Papa made a passionate argument from the floor to suggest that there are no limitations based on sex for people being able to serve in any role in the church. And for them, I think what we would say is Southern Baptists and your church are in different places and seem also to be moving in different directions.
This obviously is a huge evangelical church, a conservative church, and they said that this decision was based on essentially in line with Scripture, that they were following the Bible that says, and in particular, they referenced a verse that said that women shouldn't be in positions of authority over men. And that is the driving force behind everything that this church does, not that particular Scripture, but Scripture in general is the driving force. And so to be more aligned with Scripture, they were making this decision for these 2 churches and for the larger organization.
I've just been looking because, again, this is being live streamed, and this is something that so many people are watching. How controversial is it, right? Bigger picture beyond just this denomination, this Protestant denomination, that they're saying, hey, the Scripture says, only men can lead churches.
So I think some of the controversy actually inside the church was members felt like the church was starting to lean too far away from conservative values. There was one quote from one of the members there today where she essentially said that we're not giving in to feminism and liberalism, and we're going to follow the doctrine and make sure that we're doing things in line with that. And so, that is part of the reason that we're seeing this sort of change in direction. One of the votes essentially said that they're going to amend the Constitution. They'll have to do a second vote in order for that to go through, but they'll change their Constitution so that it's more clear that women are not to be in pastor and elder roles within the Southern Baptist Convention. We're not completely clear on what that means for these churches, whether the church is closed now or something else happens here.
Somebody else comes in. Aaron Gilchrist, thank you for being all over that one today. I really appreciate it. Yep. Belarus says his country has started taking delivery of those Russian nukes, describing them as 3 times more powerful than the bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Remember, Belarus, which borders some NATO countries, is letting some Russian troops use its land as a kind of base for its attack on Ukraine. Raf Sanchez is joining us now from Ukraine. So, Raf, anytime you hear, Russia, nukes, repositioning in the same sentence, it is obviously cause for concern. Help us calibrate how we should be thinking about this moment here. How close Vladimir Putin may actually be, if at all, to doing something more than simply moving these weapons around.
Yeah, so Hallie, this sounds really alarming, but our read on what's going on here and what seems to be the White House's read is this is Vladimir Putin kind of raising the stakes, pushing ahead the brinksmanship, reminding the world, but also the NATO powers, the U.S., that Russia is a nuclear power. And whatever happens on the battlefield here in Ukraine, a nuclear power can only be pushed so far because they retain, ultimately, the ability to literally destroy the world. So this is Vladimir Putin flexing his muscles, showing that he can surround Ukraine with these nuclear weapons, not just in Russia, but also in neighboring Belarus. Russia retains control over these nuclear weapons. It would ultimately be Vladimir Putin who would make the decision on how they are used. And Hallie, these are what are called tactical nuclear warheads. So they are smaller than the normal strategic warheads, which can make them sound less frightening. But actually, what really alarms nuclear scientists is because they're smaller, a leader might be more tempted to use them. Hallie?
Explain the timing, Raf. Why now?
So things are heating up here on the battlefield in Ukraine. Putin has been talking about this for a while, but he seems to be putting it into action now. The White House is really not eager to get drawn into a kind of game of brinksmanship with Putin here. The messaging has been fairly calm, fairly sober. I want to read you a little bit of what John Kirby from the National Security Council said earlier this week. He said, on Belarus, all I can tell you is we've seen no indications of anything that would force us to change our own posture with respect to nuclear readiness or capabilities. Now, there is a lot of nuclear jargon in there, but what he's saying, in effect, Hallie, is the U.S. has seen no indication that Putin is actually moving closer to using a nuclear warhead, even if he is moving them to Belarus, which is something the White House has said is irresponsible. The U.S. is saying there's no indication right now, at least, that Putin's preparing to press the button.
Just quickly, Raf, what has the reaction been where you are in Ukraine for some of the NATO allies who are in that region, too?
So people here in Ukraine watch extremely closely what happens in Belarus. Russian forces launched part of the initial invasion, the attempt to invade here in Kyiv from Belarus. So what happens there is very closely monitored. From their perspective, Russia has a lot of nuclear weapons just over the border in Russia itself. This isn't necessarily a cause for alarm, but it's being closely watched. Hallie?
Raf Sanchez, there for us in Kyiv. Raf, thank you so much for that reporting and that analysis tonight. Appreciate it. A new study out in just the last couple of hours finds that medications used to treat ADHD, a lot of people may use that, can actually make people who don't have ADHD less productive if they take it. We're talking about stuff like Ritalin, right? It's often prescribed for ADHD, but it's sometimes taken, as you probably know, by people who don't actually have the prescription. Stuff like, hey, I got to cram for an exam. Maybe this will help my focus, my performance here. College students, popular there. But this new study found that overall, people who do not have ADHD but who take Ritalin or similar drugs anyway were actually less accurate. They were less efficient. They took longer. It took them more work to actually finish their task. Dr. John Torres is joining us now. Significant study for a lot of people because this idea that, like, I'm just going to say Ritalin or the generic version, but Ritalin can help you study, can help make you more productive if you don't have ADHD is not actually true. How did it get that reputation?
And Hallie, in this case, when they looked at the study, they looked at Ritalin, they looked at Provigil, they looked at Adderall, these medications, and comparing it with a placebo. And I think what is happening in the real world is people see this and how it affects people with ADHD. And what it does is it helps them concentrate. It helps them work better on those single tasks, which is what happens when you go in for an exam. And so the thinking is, okay, if we just transpose that to people who don't have ADHD, it's going to work the same, right? Well, it turns out, according to the study, it doesn't, because they ended up taking 40 people and they gave them each one of those medications over a certain time period and then tried difficult tasks, not the simple math tasks that they've done in prior studies that show it might help with that, but these are tasks that took a lot of thinking and a lot of concentration, and they found out, especially for those, the better you were at those tasks on a placebo or in regular life, the worse you were at those tasks if you took any of these ADHD medications, and that was across the board they found there. And so again, although people think this might work, the study is showing it's doing actually the opposite of that. And I think the reason I think it might work is, again, because it's working on people with ADHD, it should work for everybody else, too.
Dr. John Torres, thank you for that breakdown. Interesting stuff with that new study out today. Appreciate it. Coming up here on the show, the basic thing that UPS drivers are now getting in their trucks that could keep a lot of them from going on strike. Plus, some new extraordinary details about that plane crash in the Amazon where 4 kids survived more than 40 days. What we're learning about a key part of that rescue mission in the jungle. Next. New details tonight surrounding that absolutely miraculous rescue of 4 kids from the Amazon jungle after 40 days. There's this new report out now from the Colombian officials that details the final moments of that flight. Remember, it was a small plane carrying those kids, carrying 3 adults, including their mother. It apparently ran into engine trouble as it was flying over the jungle. You can see it here. The pilot radioed in a mayday call saying the engine was failing. The pilot decided to try to land in a nearby river. That's when the plane lost contact. We never heard from the pilot again. The plane was later found nose first on the ground in the middle of the rainforest. 3 adults were found inside. They'd been killed. But the kids, they weren't there. They belonged to an indigenous community. They used the jungle to survive, basically. They hid in tree trunks. They foraged for seeds and for fruits. The government says that the kids are on their way to recovery in a hospital in Bogota. They're waiting to hear more from them about what they went through. NBC's Kelly Kobiea is following this for us. We're also hearing tonight from these children's father, Kelly.
Yes, that's right. He said that the kids, that he never lost faith, that the kids are doing well, that they really used their indigenous knowledge to survive in the forest, and just such an incredible story of survival as well. These kids now stable in that hospital, in the military hospital in Bogota, according to the hospital spirits. They're drawing pictures. They're talking about their experience. And incredibly, Hallie, searchers say they had no serious injuries from that plane crash. When they found them in the jungle over the weekend, they were malnourished, they were dehydrated, they were covered with insect bites, but otherwise okay. And, you know, this was an incredible search effort to find them. 150 soldiers and search dogs. It was a cooperation between the military and indigenous guards who really knew the forest and understood how to track in the forest. And they dropped flares. They dropped boxes of food. At one point, even blaring out a message on loudspeakers from the children's grandmother, telling them not to move, to stay in one place, that people were coming to help. Just an incredible story of survival.
So much good news, Kelly, and it is just incredible to think about that. I mean, and to see these kids, the images, the pictures that we're getting out of this. There's also this question of, I think, a rescue dog, right, who was instrumental in this search, as we're told.
Yes, the dog Wilson. We understand that he was part of the search. He was on the trail of the kids, then ran off from his handler on that trail and disappeared, got out of reach from his handler. Searchers now believe that he was actually with the kids maybe for a couple of days. They drew a picture of him when they were drawing these thank you pictures for the military, and that then he wandered off again. So he's still missing somewhere in the jungle. The military says they're still looking. They say no one will be left behind.
Kelly Kobiea, thank you so much for that reporting and for bringing us that story. Appreciate it. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, the PGA Tour Commissioner has taken a leave of absence. He's apparently recovering from some kind of a medical condition, according to the tour. They haven't said what it is or how long he'll be out. Remember, this is just a week after the PGA announced that highly controversial merger with Live Golf, which is backed by the Saudis. Number 2, prosecutors say the armorer for Rust was probably hungover when she loaded a live bullet into the gun that killed cinematographer Halyna Hutchins. In new court filings, they allege she'd been drinking and smoking marijuana at night during the filming. One of her attorneys told NBC News the prosecution's case is, quote, so weak, they are now resorting to character assassination tactics. This is after her lawyers filed a motion to dismiss her involuntary manslaughter charge. There's a preliminary hearing later this summer. Number 3, officials in Pennsylvania says they will build basically a temporary road to replace part of I-95, the part that, as you see here, collapsed in that fiery crash this weekend. The governor didn't say how long that either the new road, temporary one, or the rebuilding of the highway will take, but said crews are going to work 24/7 until it's done. Number 4, UPS drivers will get air conditioning in their delivery trucks for the very first time, according to a tentative agreement between union leaders and UPS. That's before a vote on a possible strike. It's been a big thing for drivers. NBC News reports more than 100 UPS workers have been hospitalized because they've been getting sick from heat over the last few years. Most UPS delivery trucks bought after January 1st of next year will now be required to have AC. They'll have to have it in there, according to the union statement. Number 4, an asteroid the size of the Brooklyn Bridge will pass by Earth tomorrow. Can I tell you, obviously, because otherwise that would have been the lead of our show, right, if it was going to hit Earth, but it's not. Thank you for that. It is going to get within 2.5 million miles, which I guess in like the scheme of things is relatively close. All right, well, now you know. Coming up here on the show, much more to get to, including actually some breaking news that's just coming into us. We're just learning that there is now news in that subway chokehold death. A grand jury has just voted. We're getting one of our reporters to a camera. She'll be with us in a second. Plus, we'll talk about what could be one of the first big laws to regulate AI and intentionally getting up close and personal with sharks. Lots to get to in a minute. Let's get to some breaking news right now. We're learning in the last few minutes that a grand jury has now indicted Daniel Penny in connection with that chokehold death of a man on a New York City subway, according to sources familiar with the matter. They say Penny is now being charged with second-degree manslaughter. You'll remember he was a former U.S. Marine captured on video putting Jordan Neely in a chokehold. We're going to show you just once a short piece of that video now. It is graphic. You can see here Penny holding Neely down on the subway. Again, it was captured by somebody who was standing nearby, and it got national attention in this moment. Penny's attorneys say Neely was trying to protect himself and other passengers and that he never intended to harm Neely. After the indictment, we've reached out to a spokesperson for the DA's office. No comment there. A spokesperson for Penny's legal team also had no comment. Rahema Ellis is joining us now. Rahema, tell us more about what we're learning.
Hallie, what we've learned is what you pointed out, and that is that a grand jury has indicted Daniel Penny in connection in connection with this choking death of Jordan Neely. And it comes after he was already facing a single indictment on a single count of manslaughter. That manslaughter came as a result of the district attorney's office charging him several days after this incident happened last month. It was an outcry in the city. In many ways, it had polarized people who thought that this former Marine, this young man, a former Marine, was given a pass, if you will, and some of them said they thought it might be based on race, that Daniel Penny is white and Jordan Neely is a young black man who many people pointed out that he was suffering from mental illness and had been on the list of the city for those at greatest risk of mental illness. But once again, we are finding out a grand jury has indicted Daniel Penny on manslaughter charges. What we know is that a spokesman for the district attorney's office has declined to comment at this hour, and a spokesman for Penny's legal team says that they have no comment at this moment for it as well. But this, again, was a case that really polarized the city, and now 2 counts against Daniel, one on the city side, and the grand jury has now indicted him on manslaughter. Hallie?
Rahema Ellis, thank you very much for that reporting. Appreciate it. Back to our top story tonight. We have been seeing Donald Trump make the political case for why he thinks he shouldn't face these 36 federal charges for allegedly mishandling classified documents. But what about a legal case, right? How will his lawyers defend him in court? Hidden in his 25-minute speech at Bedminster late last night, his first remarks since that arraignment in Miami was a clue, several clues, and they have something to do with socks. Here's the breakdown. It's a now familiar phrase from the former president.
And the Clinton socks case, you know what that is, right? The famous socks case. The Clinton socks case.
But what do Bill Clinton's socks have to do with Donald Trump's indictment? Take it back to the 90s and the Clinton administration, when former President Clinton talked and talked to a historian about, well, everything. Politics, diplomacy, Monica Lewinsky, nearly 80 conversations in total, all on tape. The historian, in his book, writing Clinton showed him the tapes in his secret hiding place, the socks drawer of his closet. A conservative group called Judicial Watch sued, saying Clinton's tapes should be considered presidential records and the National Archives should take them back. Clinton argued these tapes were personal and not presidential. In other words, more like a diary. And in 2012, a federal judge sided with him, saying it's not the archives that can designate what's presidential, writing that responsibility is solely left to the president. And that is the argument former President Trump is making now.
We have the Presidential Records Act. It's all under the Presidential Records Act, as it should be.
It's not just a political defense for him, but a legal one. In court filings, his attorneys making the case Mr. Trump used the Presidential Records Act to keep all those classified documents.
But these cases are barely alike.
There's a big difference. The audio tapes, anything that the Clintons allegedly kept, are not agency documents that are labeled as classified.
And that is the biggest distinction here. Mr. Clinton's tapes were not classified government documents, unlike the top secret files Mr. Trump allegedly kept.
Diaries, memories, mementos, journals, anything he creates is personal. These are classified documents that were created by the CIA, by the FBI, by the DOD. So that is a huge distinction.
And that's why Mr. Trump was charged with violating the Espionage Act, because those documents relate to national security. In the Clinton instance, the Justice Department didn't get involved. It was an outside organization that sued. In the Trump case, of course, it's DOJ prosecutors bringing those federal charges. And Mr. Clinton was never subpoenaed for those recordings. Mr. Trump was for his documents, now accused of ignoring that subpoena and keeping the sensitive material.
Arguably, once DOJ got involved, that was the point of no return. If the documents are classified or national defense information, then the Presidential Records Act simply may not provide any protections to anybody who takes those documents and holds on to them and even conceals them.
Multiple legal experts tell us that if Mr. Trump had handed those documents back when the archives asked, it's unlikely he'd be facing charges at all. Let's take it to what's happening overseas now. With the EU today taking a big step towards regulating AI with the draft law passed by European Parliament that would put some new restrictions on some of AI's riskiest uses. What does that mean, right? What's a risky use? They think facial recognition. So it would limit the ability of artificial intelligence to recognize your face. They want to be more transparent about data and make sure that AI systems don't make up illegal stuff. They hope to get to a final agreement by the end of the year. And if they do, this would be one of the first big laws to regulate AI and maybe a model for others around the world.
I think we have made history today. We have set the way for the dialogue that we will need to have. We started having with the rest of the world on how we can build responsible AI for our globe.
Gabe Gutierrez is joining us now. Gabe, first in the world, if this passes, it comes after all of these sort of AI developers came out recently. We covered it here on the show, saying that AI could actually potentially pose this like massive nuclear level risk to humanity. Tell us about this proposal and the reaction to it.
Hey there, Hallie. Well, now the reaction is coming in. For example, Oakland A, the maker of ChatGPT, says it might pull out of Europe if, depending on the final language in this legislation later this year. You mentioned it was a draft law. Now the specifics are being ironed out. But this is a major step, Hallie, as you just described, that the European Union now is on the forefront of regulating AI really across the world. And so many other policymakers globally are looking at what happens here and seeing how it plays out.
What are the big challenges here?
Well, as you said, this is trying to regulate something that is so new that hasn't really been, regulated before. Here in the United States, the U.S. Congress, has been slow to regulate AI, as you know, and is really far behind what the European Union is doing. Just this week at the Senate Judiciary Committee, there was a mother from Arizona who talked about how she was, got a phone call where the scammer apparently tried to convince her that her daughter was calling and asking for help. She says that it turns out the scammer had actually used her daughter's voice offline and created this ruse to try to convince her that she was in danger. Now, U.S. lawmakers are hearing all this, and they're trying to figure out how they can go about regulating tech giants. But as you just saw today, the European Union way ahead of that and really now at the forefront of trying to regulate these big companies. It remains to be seen of how this will be enforced really around the world and whether these companies, might choose to pull out of certain jurisdictions, which you just heard, the maker of ChatGPT wondering if it can continue to operate in Europe if this keeps going.
Gabe Gutierrez, thank you very much for that. Coming up next, proving a point just by showing up. We'll take you inside the reverse boycott in Oakland. Why A's fans trying to save the team from moving say it's the owner who's got to hit the road. That's next. Time now to get the backstory, our behind-the-scenes look at how a story comes together and how it fits into our bigger picture. And tonight, we are taking a look at this. The first time that a TV crew has done a live shot from underwater inside a shark tank at the Georgia Aquarium in Atlanta. Yeah, that's our own Tom Costello, trying to learn more about how to keep your distance when you head to the beach this summer, right, to avoid an attack. Very rare. However unlikely they may be, still often in the news, right? So Tom has this exclusive conversation with Dr. Katie Lyons. She's a shark researcher and Tom's personal underwater guide today. Take a look.
Yeah, so we have 5 different species of shark. So the ones with the big, tall dorsal fin. Oh, just right there. Look to your right.
Yep, I see it. Oh, my gosh.
So
this is just a phenomenal experience to see these sharks up close.
Yeah. It's super cool. I mean, it's, again, a completely different perspective that you get being here underwater with them.
Tom is joining us now. Tom, we're so glad you're back. Welcome home. You know, in the interest of this segment, which is all about a behind-the-scenes look, you got to take us behind the scenes because this is a logistic and technical feat to be able to pull this off. You were good to go for like 2 hours, and I hear that like 8 minutes before your live shot on the Today Show, everything fell apart.
Oh, it was closer than that, actually. Wow. By the way, I still got the water in my ears.
Sure you do.
So literally in the commercial break before they come to me, suddenly my cameraman is going like this. He's underwater with me, right? Something is clearly wrong.
Oh,
He's lost the camera signal. His batteries have died. Oh my gosh, what do? We're underwater.
But of course, you've been there for 3 hours, ready to go, and of course
it's crazy. It always happens like this. So they literally were in this pool with 15 sharks circling, and they bring a guy in a raft who's like canoeing out or coming out to us with batteries, and my photographer has got his head above water.
Swim up now.
Hands him the camera, puts in new batteries. They bring it back down below the water, and then. Thank goodness, just in the nick of time, Tom's live in Atlanta.
Wow, which is so stressful. And by the way, you're doing it all, as you say, with a dozen-plus sharks. Like
I'm going to be precise here. 15 sharks.
And you felt good about that? Like you were cool
listen, it was a phenomenal experience. And you can see that the cage itself is stainless steel and plexiglass.
Was your producer, Jay Blackman, in there with you?
He was in there with us last week, not today. Today it was pretty much me and the safety diver and the photographer. Incredible experience, though, to see these animals up close, the predators of I mean, they are truly incredible species.
Because this is about how a story comes together, people, I think, are used to seeing you talk about the economy, talking about you, as you point out, you hunted for Russian subs this year, right? Now, here you are hanging with sharks in kind of a beach safety feature. How do you end up, and I'm not asking for personal reasons, but how do you end up assigned to a story like this?
So in this case, Jay Blackman, my producer, had been talking to that aquarium for a long time because he'd been there before.
About this, which is
other cool stuff, right? Yeah. But they said, hey, we've now got the technology. They called him up. We've got the technology. Would you ever want to do a live shot underneath the water, live on TV? So we're not just talking about going down and interviewing somebody. We've now got to create the communication.
You had IFB
underwater, this thing that we have, right? You have the communication all the way up to New York. They've got to hear you. I got to hear them live on the Today Show. It's a massive technical challenge, but they pulled it off. It took a lot of work.
I bet it did. And kudos to the team. And in some ways, kind of a nod to one of our beloved colleagues who has since gone on to his happy retirement. I think of scuba diving. I think of Carrie and those live shots, and him doing all these different kinds of things. You actually chatted with him a bit right before this dive.
I called Carrie. Well, Carrie and I are dear friends. And, of course, he's the guy who knows everything about wildlife, especially going into the water. And I was talking to him the night before, last night, in the hotel. And he said, oh, I did that already. I've already done that
There's
live.
Carrie now. We're showing some shots
Wait a minute. You've done this already? You were in this particular tank with the sharks? Well, not so much. It was a whale shark. Okay, but I've got 15 sharks. I said, that was a goldfish compared to what I got. Anyway, he's a dear friend, and he's taught me a lot. So he's now retired, and he can look on with envy but it was a great trip.
That is so fun. Tom Costello, we appreciate you. Thank you for really giving us a behind-the-scenes look at how
Yeah,
it went
you
down.
bet. You bet. By the way, go to my Twitter feed if you want to watch the whole story.
Get that plug in, man. You
can
better.
watch the whole
All
story
right.
on my Twitter feed.
We'll pop
Okay.
up a thing. Thank you, Tom. NBC News covers hundreds of other non-shark related stories every day. And because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Out of our Midwest bureau, a city near Detroit has banned pride flags on any public property. Some members of the all-Muslim city council says the pride flag clashes with the way that some of their members believe, some of the faith. One city council member said LGBTQ+ people are welcome and they want to respect people's religious rights. You can still have pride flags on private property. Out of our Western Bureau, check out these crickets, millions of them. Mormon crickets, they're called, taking over parts of Nevada. They move about a mile a day, according to one local agriculture expert there. They're climbing up the walls of houses. They're not really, damaging. All you can do, they're just everywhere. All you can do is wait them out. They're going to move on eventually. Also out of our Western Bureau, one family was cleaning out the home of their late father in LA and found about $1 million pennies. It's usually about $10,000, that's $10,000, right? But those aren't just any pennies. The family thinks he hoarded them after the U.S. switched from copper pennies to zinc during World War II. They could potentially be worth a lot more than simply 1 cent each. They put the pennies up for sale. We'll keep you posted on how much they get. Still ahead, Bud Light is no longer the top-selling beer for the first time in more than 2 decades. So what's at play? Does it have to do with that backlash? And how did Modelo get so high on the list? That's next. We are finding out today that for the first time in more than 20 years, Bud Light is no longer the best-selling beer in this country. Modelo Especial is. You can see in this chart we're about to show you here, Bud Light sales going down since March. Modelo sales going up. Bud Light sales are down by 24% in just the last few weeks. And look at the timeline, right? When did this all start happening? Right around the time that Bud Light partnered with a trans influencer, among many other influencers, for a campaign, like a marketing campaign. That kicked off a huge backlash against Bud Light, led by many conservatives. Investopedia editor-in-chief Caleb Silver is joining us now. So first of all, Caleb, why Modelo Especial? Bud Light clearly having issues with this backlash, this controversy it's been embroiled in for months. Why is it Modelo that's really rising here?
Yeah, well, Modelo has avoided the controversy. Also, Modelo is part of the Modelo group. So Corona's in that, Modelo Negra, Modelo Reserva, a lot of good beers there, very down-the-line advertising campaign, and as cheap an alternative to Bud and Bud Light on the market right now. So good marketing and flooding the market with a lot of beers people like and taking advantage of potentially a PR misstep here by Bud Light, which did not calculate the size of the controversy that it might have created through this ad campaign.
Well, from a business perspective, Caleb, that's also part of what's interesting here. Sometimes you see companies in crisis that can ride out a controversy. Anheuser-Busch has struggled to do that so far. I mean, this was brewing back in March. I think, if I remember correctly, it was a March Madness campaign that they partnered with Mulvaney on. Here we are now. It's mid-June, Caleb, almost.
Yeah, and the stock for Anheuser-Busch is down some 15%, while Modelo, which is part of Constellation Brands, that stock is up 6 or 7%, and the stock market's been rallying. So not only has it eaten away at its sales, which hurts its distributors, who are independent businesses that distribute on the behalf of Bud and Bud Light, it's taken 15% off the share price. That's tens of millions of dollars in the share price alone. So it's taken the hit on the PR front, it's taken the hit on the sales front, and now it's taken the hit on the market value of Anheuser-Busch, and I don't think they intended for that to happen at all.
Can Anheuser-Busch turn it around? What would that take?
I don't know. Usually these things come and go. We've seen it with Gillette. Right. We've seen it with Nike. This one has stuck with us for several months. So you'd think it'd be over by now. We're going into the very heavy beer buying part of the year right now. Very bad news for those distributors, again, of Bud and Bud Light. This could last all summer, but usually, especially with social media, these things come and go. This one has some staying power.
Yeah. Have you seen other brands try to capitalize on this? In other words, has Modelo done anything differently, or that brand, to try to take advantage of this? Or is it just simply, they're kind of the, I don't want to use the word lucky, but the lucky recipients of a drop in interest in Bud Light?
Yeah, there's some of that, and nobody is really poking a finger at Anheuser-Busch for making this move. I think Barron's want to stay away from this controversy because they've seen how detrimental it's been to Anheuser-Busch and Bud Light specifically.
Caleb Silver, thank you very much. Appreciate it. So tonight's original now, an in-depth look at a topic we've been watching. Let's talk about the Oakland A's, right, who may not be the Oakland A's for much longer. Right now, you've got lawmakers in Nevada closing in on a deal to give millions of dollars, taxpayer money, to the team for a stadium in Las Vegas. It's in the hands of the Nevada Assembly right now. The state Senate passed it overnight. The Republican governor says he's going to sign that into law. And that news has been devastating to fans in Oakland, the team's home for 5 decades. You've seen protests all season at the Coliseum, the A's attendance dropping almost as fast as the team's historically bad start to the season. But for one night, overnight, we saw this passionate group of A's fans who wanted to show they care. They want to show they want their team to stay. So they planned a very different kind of boycott. Here's Jake Ward.
It's Tuesday night, usually a slow day for baseball, especially in Oakland. But something strange is going on. The deafening chants of 28,000 fans fill the Oakland Coliseum. All to see a last-place team. Why? Well, because the owners of the A's want to leave Oakland, announcing they plan to abandon the city after 55 years for Las Vegas. The team says they're losing money because fans don't show up. Fans say they're not the problem. The team's doubled ticket prices and traded away beloved players. So they've organized something unusual, a reverse boycott.
Why show up in big numbers when they've done so little for you?
It's just a reminder of, like, how it used to be, you know. So we've been here, we continue to be here. It's just that we're just trying to create a playoff vibe, and anytime that Coliseum is packed, it rumbles like no other stadium in the world.
When high school baseball coach Stu Clary was 10 years old, the A's were World Series champions, sure, but they were irresistible for other reasons.
They dressed in green and gold while everyone else wore white and gray. They had mustaches when everyone else was clean shaven. There was stories of them fighting each other in the clubhouse.
Then there's the ballpark. A new analysis by a sports betting website shows baseball fans consider the Oakland Coliseum the worst in baseball. But years of negotiating with the city for a new site have failed. Oakland's mayor says in the future, no city will be able to afford the old way of attracting a sports team.
At the end of the day, you know, we have to come together and have true partnership. These stadiums cannot be financially backed 100%, 120% by cities. It can't work that way anymore.
She's referring to the $380 million in taxpayer money that Nevada could give the A's. Mayor Tao says she can't see the logic of it.
The A's had proposed a 55-acre ballpark with thousands of units of housing, retail, and restaurants. And we were very close to that deal, and I believe we can get there in short order. And in Las Vegas, they're only proposing a ballpark, just 9 acres for the stadium and no additional development. If that's what they need in Oakland, we can make that work too, of course.
Neither the A's nor Major League Baseball responded to our request for comment. But what is the business case for this move? There's no guarantee fans will come. Just look at the last team to move to Vegas.
The Raiders, we saw that they regressed from a couple of good years, and now they're middle of the pack as well.
And Oakland is the 10th largest media market in the nation. Las Vegas is 40th. But here's one potential factor: gambling.
Maybe baseball feels like it wants to be close to one of its largest sponsors in MGM.
The reverse boycotters hope this display of fan loyalty will catch the attention of Major League Baseball and convince them to reject a move. Because if old-fashioned fan loyalty isn't enough to keep a team in town, organizers say, no team is safe.
If it can happen to the Oakland A's, the historic Oakland A's, charter member of the American League, 9-time World Series champions, home of countless baseball icons like Reggie Jackson and Rickey Henderson, then it can happen to any other team.
Jake Ward, NBC News.
Our thanks to Jake for that reporting. By the way, the A's won that game last night 2-1 against the Rays, Oakland's 7th straight win, making them no longer the worst team in baseball. That does it for us this hour. We've got more coverage picking up right now. We are coming on the air with breaking news right now. An active tornado warning happening right now in Georgia. At least 6 tornadoes reported in the southeast. Look at that. We now know 1 woman at least has been hospitalized. There's also dangerous extreme heat in Texas. We'll take you live to Houston, where folks are concerned about whether the power grid will hold up. Also tonight, Attorney General Merrick Garland defending the special counsel investigating former President Trump as a new snapshot is out showing him way out in front among Republicans, the former president. What our sources are saying tonight about what's happening around him and why Mr. Trump's former VP is catching a little bit of heat from one radio host on pardons. Plus, why Mr. Trump keeps bringing up former President Bill Clinton's socks. It's actually part of his legal argument, not just his political one. We'll explain in the breakdown. Also breaking into us tonight, a grand jury in New York indicting the white man who killed a black street performer on the subway. What we know about the charge Daniel Penny now faces. And a new vote tonight from one of the country's biggest religious groups to kick out churches who let women be pastors. How the Southern Baptist Convention is defending the move later on in the show. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and we're going to start with some of that breaking news because parts of Georgia, as we speak, are under an active tornado warning. Really bad thunderstorms right now are putting about 30 million people at risk. I want to show you this huge storm cloud. Look at that, taking over the sky in Georgia. We've seen 6 reported tornadoes today alone. Lots of damage, right? Look at this. There's like the siding off that house, the roof torn off the house. But this is in Alabama. We know one person has been hospitalized in that state after her home was damaged. No word on her condition. There's been office buildings destroyed. Look, you see the ceilings off that one. Looks like the wall fell out. Some areas are facing what's known as, this is the technical term, a particularly dangerous situation. That's rare. Partly because of that hail, golf ball size coming down from the sky, winds moving at almost hurricane force speeds. Go a little further west out to Texas. Very dangerous heat today with alerts from Waco down to Brownsville. We're talking temperatures of 115 or even higher in some spots. And concerns now about what this is going to do to the power grid. Think about it. Everybody's running their air conditioners to try to stay cool. So can the grid handle it? We have meteorologist Bill Karen standing by on those storms. But I want to get first to Sam Brock, who is out in that heat in Houston. Tell us more, Sam.
Yeah, Hallie, Houston is officially right now under a heat emergency plan. And I just spoke with the mayor, Sylvester Turner, about 15 or 20 minutes ago. He said it's normal in July or August to deploy this kind of plan, but not in early to mid-June. That is exactly where they find themselves right now, though. Hallie, it is 96 degrees, but with the heat index well above 100. And traditionally, the state of Texas, when you see 2 consecutive days of 108 or higher for the heat index, they will start taking precautionary measures. But that's already rolled underway here. And it's serious. And here's just an example of why, statistically, every single year, according to the CDC, 700 people die from heat-related illness. You also have some 67,000 that make ER trips, 9,000 who are hospitalized. So certainly, we understand the gravity of what could happen. And Mayor Turner told me he's particularly concerned about vulnerable populations and the elderly, because they have a situation where they are looking at either spending money on food or medicine, and they think, I can't run my air conditioning because it's too costly. So he's trying to encourage those folks, no, please go out, run your air conditioner. We'll figure out the electrical bill after the fact. But in the meantime, they're trying to handle this with sort of a multi-dimensional approach, cooling centers as well, messaging on checking on your neighbors. Here's a little snippet of what I just learned from Mayor Turner moments ago.
In this particular case, it seemed like things have dramatically increased suddenly, that we're activating our heat emergency plan even now.
They have distributed, Hallie, somewhere in the neighborhood of 350 air conditioning units to the elderly in the greater Houston area, Harris County as well, to make sure that they're well taken care of, because there are so many there right now who just felt vulnerable with no access to air. And thankfully, those folks do have it right now.
So fine, run it, right? That's the guidance. Of course, get that AC going. Can the grid handle it? That's the question.
Oh, that is a big question. So I did ask Mayor Turner as well, are you concerned about the reliability of ERCOT, their electrical grid, which is contained in Texas and can't bring in capacity from the west or from the east? There was legitimately, Hallie, about a 5 to 7 second pause before he responded and said, yes, I am. Because he was actually in the state legislature in 2011 when they confronted a similar problem to what we saw in 2021 with a snowstorm creating widespread blackouts. And the state legislature was faced with a decision, how are we going to address this? Are we going to expand capacity? Or what they chose to do, raise pricing when you get a narrow enough gap between the capacity in the system and how much people are using. They just make you spend more money to obtain that energy. So they're using consumer behavior against the people here when they need air conditioning potentially to save their lives, which continues to be a big problem in the state of Texas.
Sam Brock, thank you very much for that reporting live for us from Houston. Bill Cairns is now tracking those storms, the potential tornadoes, the dangerous weather system a little further east. Georgia, Alabama, right? That's kind of the target zone.
Yeah, we're halfway about through this severe weather outbreak, and already we've seen about 6 tornadoes. We mostly watch the tornado threat ending in an hour or two, and then we'll have a wind damage threat right through the overnight hours into tomorrow morning. So 6 tornadoes, already 62 high wind reports, and about 38 reports of large hail, and that includes a 5-inch hailstone in Mississippi, which potentially could tie the state record. So that's, that's a softball that fell out of the sky that someone captured and they measured it.
Wow.
Pretty incredible. So we'll get confirmation on that in the days ahead once they confirm it. So this map has way too much information on it. This is all the severe thunderstorm watches and tornado watches, but it stretches from southern Georgia now all the way back to Dallas. So everyone in this area has a chance of seeing some strong storms. Some of the most dangerous storms, the ones that have tornado warnings on them, one is crossing Interstate 75. This is in Georgia, just south of Tifton, right over near Lenox. Tornado sirens are going off here. And also, we have another new tornado warning here with the sirens going off. That one's just to the southeast there of Albany. And as far as Montgomery goes, this area in Alabama has a ton of heavy rain. So here's Greenville, here's Montgomery, and look at all the bright pinks. There's going to be a lot of flash flooding issues throughout the evening throughout this region. So as far as severe weather goes, 31 million people at risk today. Tomorrow, a smaller area, but still along the Gulf Coast and in central portions of Oklahoma. And Hallie, I'll end with this. We're not done with that story about the smoke in Canada. Air quality is unhealthy right now in Minneapolis, and all of this is going to travel through the Great Lakes and head for the Northeast. It won't be as bad as last week, but be ready for it. You're going to hear more about this in the days ahead.
Bill Cairns, you've got a busy couple days ahead of you. Thank you very much for being there for us. Tonight, we are getting the first comments from the Attorney General since former President Trump pleaded not guilty to those 37 federal charges in Miami. You've got Merrick Garland, you see him there, backing up his special counsel, with the Justice Department facing a lot of attacks from Republicans, accusing the DOJ of becoming too weaponized against conservatives. Listen to Garland.
When I appointed Mr. Smith, I did so because it underscores the Justice Department's commitment to both independence and accountability. Mr. Smith is a veteran career prosecutor.
This comes as we are getting our first snapshot at how voters are feeling after that arraignment that we saw, and in the process of this indictment, these charges against him. This new survey shows nearly no change, right? Down 3%. If you look at the way he's polling here, down 3%, but that's inside the margin of error here since the indictment came out. NBC's Garrett Hake is in Bedminster, New Jersey. So, Garrett, if today was the opportunity for the DOJ to kind of take the stage, right, to go front and center, talk us through what's happening behind the scenes in Mr. Trump's orbit. They've got some new fundraising numbers that are just out, but there's a little bit of context we should know about. Talk us through it.
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. The word from Trump insiders today is basically keep calm and campaign on. Sources close to Trump say that the candidate is in good spirits. His senior staff feel pretty good about how they've been able to manage the events around his arraignment over the last couple days. They like the saturation coverage that they get across the media, the way that any Trump story, good or bad, tends to block out the sun. It just makes it harder when their candidate is in such a commanding position in the polls for anybody else to break through. And it also makes it easier for them to raise money, and that's the news that has come within the last half hour. The Trump campaign announcing that they've raised more than $6 million in the week or so since this indictment was first announced. That's a big number on its face, but it's not as big as what they raised after the first indictment in New York State back in April. In that case, they raised $12 million in a similar time frame, without, by the way, a big kind of set-piece fundraiser like they had last night here in Bedminster. So a bit of a mixed kind of bag in terms of what we're learning from the data points that are coming in late today. The polling numbers still very good for Donald Trump, still putting him in a dominant position. The fundraising numbers still big, but perhaps the outrage machine not churning quite as efficiently with those small dollar donors as the campaign would have liked to see. I think it'll take a little bit more time to parse all the meaning out of that, but it's a useful data point nonetheless.
Another data point, obviously, is the polling numbers we've been talking about here, Garrett. Talk us through that.
Yeah, look, I mean, once again, we're seeing more national polling, more polling of Trump's favorability numbers that still show him leading the field in a pretty commanding way. He's up about 30 points over Ron DeSantis. And the polling data also shows the issue set that's out there for Republican voters, and that the biggest issue remains the economy. 44% of voters saying that the economy is their dominant issue. And, Hallie, it's hard to figure out exactly how you would even poll an issue like these classified documents, I suppose, protection of national security. I mean, there could be a way to get that. Yeah, there should be a way to get that question in front of voters. But as you see, they're not volunteering it, which on its face is probably good for Donald Trump. But, economy has traditionally been an issue in which Republicans in general and Donald Trump specifically had polled pretty well. If that's the issue most folks care about, it's probably a good poll for Donald Trump.
We mentioned former Vice President Mike Pence getting into a bit of a spicy exchange with the radio host over this issue of pardons here. That is becoming, as you, I think, wisely put it, a kind of litmus test for some of these Republican candidates up against Donald Trump. Obviously, he is presumed innocent until proven guilty. But let me play first what Mike Pence said, and then I want you to walk through some of the back and forth. Let me play it.
I take the pardon authority very seriously. It's an enormously important power of someone in an executive position. And I just think it's premature to have any conversation about that right now, guys.
Talk through that piece of it, Garrett.
Look, this goes to the idea of how Donald Trump blocks out the sun in the Republican Party. And here now, this has become a litmus test question on the right. For folks who've been kind of preconditioned to think that everything about this indictment is political or a witch hunt, the natural question is, all right, so if he gets convicted, what are you going to do about it should you happen to be president? And so far, we've seen Vivek Ramaswamy come out and say he would certainly pardon Trump. Nikki Haley says she's kind of leaning that way. She's taken a variety of stances on this indictment really since the news broke. And Mike Pence has been trying to keep his powder dry, trying to not commit himself to stances before all the information becomes available. He did it before the specifics of the indictment were laid out, really tried to hold back a little bit. He's trying to do so again here. And as you'll hear in this exchange, that's not good enough for these conservative radio hosts. Well, Hallie, perhaps you won't hear it here, but there's another back and forth that occurs with those. Yeah. You'll just have to take my word for it that this wasn't sufficient for these hosts. I mean, this has become a much more serious issue on the right. And the idea that Pence might want to wait for the outcome of a trial that hasn't even started yet to say whether or not he would pardon the defendant was termed insufficient. And we'll see if this continues to be an issue in which all these Republican candidates get pressed when they do conservative media.
Yeah, Mr. Pence saying he didn't want to engage in hypotheticals at that point. Garrett Haake, I appreciate you live for us in Bedminster. Thank you. You've heard Mr. Trump's political defense. Later in the show, we're going to break down the legal defense he's trying to make and what it has to do with Bill Clinton's sock drawer. I want to get to some developing news on the economy, however, because late today we are getting word from the Fed. Guess what? Not another interest rate hike. They're pressing pause on that, at least for now, but they are previewing a couple more down the road. 2 more rate hikes before the end of the year. Here's the Fed Chair, Jay Powell.
Looking ahead, nearly all committee participants view it as likely that some further rate increases will be appropriate this year to bring inflation down to 2% over time.
He wants inflation at 2%. Right now, inflation is at 4%. Not quite where the Fed wants it, but the lowest that it's been in 2 years. It means the cost of, like, gas, the cost of used cars, for example, is going, it's rising less than it was rising before. How about that? Let me bring in Shaq Brewster, who's inside a grocery store in Chicago. And Shaq, whatever happens with interest rate hikes is not going to have immediate impact on people's grocery budgets where you are, but it does speak to these broader questions about where the economy is and how people are feeling about it.
That's right. When people are putting items into their shopping cart, that's not going to determine or be determined by what the Fed's decision was earlier today. But what impact it could have is on what the Fed decides to do in the future. Because you've mentioned we have that headline of inflation is the best it's been since March of 2021. But when you talk to people about how they're feeling day in and day out, when they're going and making that final purchase, that's where you get a little more variety there. Listen to some of the conversations we heard today.
They're saying that inflation is easing. Do you feel that?
No, not at all. What you could take $200 and get now, it takes almost $400 when you're shopping.
There's a little level out now, but the food some of the food is ridiculous.
So when you're still talking about prices increasing, though at a better pace, people are still seeing a bigger bill at the end of the month, at the end of their shopping trip. And that's why there's a lag between that data that we're looking at from the federal government and what folks are telling me here on the ground.
Shaq Brewster, live for us there. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Tonight, we are learning that one of the biggest religious groups in the country, the Southern Baptist Convention, just passed its first vote to ban women from most leadership positions inside the church, after also overwhelmingly voting to expel 2 of its churches for having female pastors earlier. It's happening at the convention's annual meeting in Louisiana. Remember, the SBC is the country's biggest Protestant denomination. More than 10,000 members of the convention voted by a 9-to-1 margin, so overwhelmingly, to for sure seal the exit of a megachurch in California and a smaller congregation in Kentucky, both with female pastors. The one in Kentucky, by the way, led her church for something like 3 decades. The convention posting a statement today saying, in part, the church in Kentucky was, quote, not in friendly cooperation with the SBC because they say Scripture reserves the office of pastor for men. Aaron Gilchrist is here to break it down for us. Big moves here.
Yeah, for sure. The SBC wrapping up their annual meeting in New Orleans today, and there was a Virginia pastor who led this effort to get the SBC Constitution amended to say that only men can hold pastor or elder positions in churches in accordance with Scripture. They said they needed a 2/3 vote, majority vote of the representatives at this meeting in order for this to pass. They got that. So next year they'll have to do a second vote to get the same numbers in order for the Constitution to be changed there. This vote came after the same group of people overwhelmingly, as you said, voted to hold up the executive committee's action from February that expelled 5 churches from the convention, churches that are led by women or have women in leadership roles. 2 of those churches chose to appeal that action. The ones you mentioned, Fern Creek Baptist Church in Louisville, Kentucky, Saddleback Church in Southern California. They made their cases at that meeting yesterday, but to no avail. The megachurch, Saddleback, was founded by Rick Warren. You may remember from The Purpose-Driven Life. He wrote that book. 23,000 members of that church. They recently elevated 3 women to pastor roles at that church, still led by a man as the lead pastor there. Fern Creek has had that female pastor, as you said, for 3 decades, 30 years. The SBC president actually referenced her in some of his remarks at a news conference today. I want you to hear that.
Linda Popham made a passionate argument from the floor to suggest that there are no limitations based on sex for people being able to serve in any role in the church. And for them, I think what we would say is Southern Baptists and your church are in different places and seem also to be moving in different directions.
And Rick Warren spoke after the vote about Saddleback as well today, and he said that this was a vote for conformity and uniformity rather than unity inside this evangelical conservative convention.
Aaron Gilchrist following all of that for us. Again, a big moment for one of the country's biggest denominations here. Thank you for being on top of it. Good to see you. The EU today oversees taking a big step toward regulating AI with the draft law. It's passed by Parliament. It would restrict, for the first time ever in the world, some of the riskiest uses of AI, like facial recognition, right? Like making sure that some data gets handed over. They want to be more transparent about that. They want to make sure that AI can't just make up a bunch of illegal stuff. They want to get to a final agreement by the end of the year. If they do, it would be the, as we said, first big law to regulate this, maybe a model for others around the world.
I think we have made history today. We have set the way for the dialogue that we will need to have. We started having with the rest of the world on how we can build responsible AI for our globe.
Gabe Gutierrez is joining us now. Explain the significance and the stakes here, right, Gabe? Because right now this is still fairly theoretical in the EU, but if it passes, it maybe sets the example for how to get a handle on AI after a bunch of AI developers came out and said the risks are astronomical if we don't get some regulations.
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. This is, as you said, a major step towards regulating AI. The first major step really around the world. And this is a draft law. It's a series of bills that are set to be worked on later this year. And if it does pass in its final form, yeah, these regulations are light years ahead of what the U.S. is considering right now. And some AI developers say that they may have to end up pulling out of Europe. And, you know, what this draft law would do is essentially have a lot of these new restrictions. It would require AI developers to, you know, disclose if any copyrighted material was used to train their systems, and would also, in some cases, you know, require them to label AI-generated content. So this is much stricter than anything under consideration really across the world. And again, the stakes are so high here because AI has really flourished so much just within the last few years, and it seems regulators across the world are struggling to keep up with it, Hallie.
Gabe Gutierrez, thank you very much for all that. Appreciate it. Let's get now to some developing news that we have confirmed some new details on. The first reaction now on the indictment of Daniel Penny by a grand jury from New York City officials. According to sources familiar with the matter, Daniel Penny has been indicted in connection with that chokehold death of somebody on a New York City subway. They say Penny's being now charged with second-degree manslaughter. You'll remember he's a former U.S. Marine. He was captured on video putting Jordan Neely in a chokehold. We will show you just once a short piece of that video now. It is graphic. You can see Penny holding Neely down on the subway. Captured, again, this is on video cam, you know, iPhone, whatever it is, by somebody who is nearby. Huge national spotlight here. Penny's attorney says Penny was trying to simply protect himself and other passengers, that he never intended to hurt Neely. After the indictment and our reporting of it, we reached out to a spokesperson for the DA's office. No comment there. Also no comment from a spokesperson for Penny's legal team. Rahema Ellis is joining us now. Rahema, bring us up to speed.
We have gotten a comment, Hallie, from the mayor's office. Mayor Adams put out a statement just a short while ago, and I think we've got a full screen of it, and I'll read it for you. It says, "I appreciate District Attorney Bragg's conducting a thorough investigation into the death of Jordan Neely. Like I said when the DA first brought charges, I have the utmost faith in the judicial process, and now that the grand jury has indicted Daniel Penny, a trial and justice can move forward." Indeed, Daniel Penny had been arrested on charges of a single count of second-degree manslaughter some days ago, but many people were feeling that the charges came later than they should have. After this incident happened last month, Daniel Penny was questioned, but he was released. He was not charged initially, but there was an outcry throughout the city. In fact, there might have been two camps in the city of people thinking that if there was not justice in this case, because it was the coroner's office had ruled that the cause of death was a homicide as a result of this chokehold. Now, Daniel Penny, this former Marine, as you talk about, Hallie, he has been speaking out recently, and just this weekend, his attorneys, his legal team, released a video of him explaining that he never intended to harm him, but he was trying to protect himself and other passengers. I think we have a soundbite of that for you to listen to.
I was listening to music at the time, and he was yelling, so I took my headphones out to hear what he was yelling. And the three main threats that he repeated over and over was, "I'm going to kill you, I'm prepared to go to jail for life, and I'm willing to die."
And he said he was acting in self-defense to protect people, but the Reverend Al Sharpton, who spoke at Jordan Neely's funeral, came out with a statement as well and says here that this was a clear case of vigilanteism that has no place in our society. And that's how this case has divided people and the city. Some saying that he was protecting people, others saying that he was a vigilante, and some think that it was based on race. Hallie?
Rahema Ellis, thank you very much for that reporting. Coming up here on the show, new warnings tonight about a hepatitis outbreak across a bunch of states. Why officials think it could be because of something you may have in your freezer. Stay with us. The Kentucky Horse Racing Commission changing up some of the ways it's doing business after those horse deaths we've told you about. More on that in our 5 things. But first, some new details tonight about that incredible rescue of 4 kids from the jungle in the Amazon after 40 days. There's this new report from Colombian officials. detailing the final moments of the flight. The small plane carrying those kids, carrying 3 adults, including their mother, running into engine trouble over the jungle. And now we're hearing more about what the pilot said in those moments before the crash. He issued a mayday, on the radio, saying that the engine was failing, decided to try to land in a nearby river before the plane lost contact. We never heard from the pilot again. The plane was found later nose first on the ground in the middle of this huge rainforest. The 3 adults were inside, dead. The kids were nowhere to be found. They belonged to an indigenous community. They hid in tree trunks from predators. They foraged for fruits and seeds. They used empty bottles to collect rainwater to survive. The government says those kids are now on their way to recovery in a hospital in Bogota. They're waiting to hear more from them about what they went through in what has just been such a miracle, that long in the jungle. Hallie joining us now, and every detail that comes out adds to just the sort of shocking and incredible nature of this story. Tell us more about it and what we're hearing from these kids' father.
Yeah, so the father and the grandfather and the grandmother actually have all been talking about what the children have been telling them about their experience in the jungle. And the searchers have talked a lot about what these kids went through and what they saw when they first found them as well. They said for one thing, the 13-year-old, the oldest, Leslie, was really smart about her survival tactics in the jungle. That it appears they stayed around the crash site for the first 4 days. And when they finally wandered off, the father of 2 of the children said that the mother actually told them, you need to go in order to survive. And when they finally started wandering off, looking for a water source and a safe place to stay, Leslie took camping gear from that wreckage site. She took an empty water bottle so that they were able to collect that water. She took a flashlight that was still working, batteries running out, but still working when rescuers found them. Just some incredible details about how they managed to make it those 40 days in the jungle. The hospital director in Bogota, where they're being treated, says that they're in good spirits. They're all stable. And incredibly, Hallie, none of them, according to searchers, had any serious injuries from that plane crash. It was just mosquito bites, malnutrition, and dehydration, all of which they're recovering from now.
So much good news, Kelly. Obviously not the dehydration, the malnutrition, but the fact that they're alive at all, right? The recovery that they're getting help for in this process. There is also, this search and rescue dog who's instrumental to finding the kids, Wilson. What do we know about the dog, how officials are trying to find him now?
Yeah, so the search isn't over. The Colombian military has said that they will continue looking. They will not leave anyone behind, and particularly not this search dog, Wilson. From what we understand, he actually picked up the scent of the kids at some point in the search and got too far from his handler. His handler wasn't able to control him. He potentially was with the kids for a couple of days, as it turns out. The kids drew pictures of him in their thank you pictures to the military and the other rescuers. He wandered off, and searchers followed some of his footprints in order to get closer to those kids. Hallie, it's incredible. As it turns out, they were only about 3 miles from the crash site, and at a couple of points during that search, searchers were within 100 feet of them. They just couldn't find them. That's how difficult that terrain is. But they're really hoping that they can track down the hero dog, Wilson.
Hallie, thank you very much for that. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, officials in Pennsylvania say they're going to build a temporary road to replace part of I-95 after it collapsed over the weekend because of that fiery crash. No word yet on how long either project will take, either rebuilding 95 or creating this temporary road, but the governor says crews will work 24/7 until everything can open back up. Number 2, firefighters in Oregon are working to contain a couple of wildfires in one in the northeast part of the state that's grown to 15,000 acres. Look at the flames. Look at the smoke. Some of it's already into Washington state. There's 30-mile-an-hour winds that are expected to calm down overnight. That's good news for firefighters. Number 3, the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission is hiring somebody they call a safety steward to inspect racetracks and to make recommendation to keep horses and riders safe. This is after a dozen horses died in the course of a month at Churchill Downs, which hosts the Kentucky Derby. Number 4, the FDA is recalling frozen strawberries and some other frozen fruit blends that are sold in dozens of states. The agency says they may have been contaminated with hepatitis A. If you bought like smoothie blends, berry stuff at Costco, Walmart, you should go check for Great Value and Raider Farms brand products. Look online, look at our website. We've got the recall numbers for you there. Number 5, an asteroid the size of the... Okay. An asteroid the size of the Brooklyn Bridge is going to pass by Earth tomorrow. Do you know why I love this story? Can I just be real with you? Because guys, if this was going to not pass Earth tomorrow, like, bye, I'm not here. Meaning, like, I'm home with my family, having like a Bruce Willis, apocalypse moonshot moment. Anyways, whatever. It's 2.5 million miles from Earth. Kind of close, but not really. You're good. Enjoy your night. When we come back, a lot more to get to, including former President Trump giving us a sneak peek at maybe his legal strategy, why it has something to do with socks in the breakdown next. Officials in Poland are stopping this super popular tourist experience. We're going to explain in the Global. But first, we've been seeing Donald Trump make the political case for why he shouldn't face more than 36 federal charges for allegedly mishandling classified documents. But what about a legal case? How might his lawyers defend him in court? Inside that 25-minute speech at Bedminster last night lie some clues, and they have something to do with socks. Here's the breakdown. It's a now familiar phrase from the former president.
And the Clinton socks case, you know what that is, right? The famous socks case. The Clinton socks case.
But what do Bill Clinton's socks have to do with Donald Trump's indictment? Take it back to the 90s and the Clinton administration, when former President Clinton talked and talked to a historian about, well, everything. Politics, diplomacy, Monica Lewinsky, nearly 80 conversations in total, all on tape. The historian, in his book, writing Clinton showed him the tapes in his secret hiding place, the socks drawer of his closet. A conservative group called Judicial Watch sued, saying Clinton's tapes should be considered presidential records and the National Archives should take them back. Clinton argued these tapes were personal and not presidential. In other words, more like a diary. And in 2012, a federal judge sided with him, saying it's not the archives that can designate what's presidential, writing that responsibility is solely left to the president. And that is the argument former President Trump is making now.
We have the Presidential Records Act. It's all under the Presidential Records Act, as it should be.
It's not just a political defense for him, but a legal one. In court filings, his attorneys making the case Mr. Trump used the Presidential Records Act to keep all those classified documents.
But these cases are barely alike.
There's a big difference. The audio tapes, anything that the Clintons allegedly kept, are not agency documents that are labeled as classified.
And that is the biggest distinction here. Mr. Clinton's tapes were not classified government documents, unlike the top secret files Mr. Trump allegedly kept.
Diaries, memories, mementos, journals, anything he creates is personal. These are classified documents that were created by the CIA, by the FBI, by the DOD. So that is a huge distinction.
And that's why Mr. Trump was charged with violating the Espionage Act, because those documents relate to national security. In the Clinton instance, the Justice Department didn't get involved. It was an outside organization that sued. In the Trump case, of course, it's DOJ prosecutors bringing those federal charges. And Mr. Clinton was never subpoenaed for those recordings. Mr. Trump was for his documents, now accused of ignoring that subpoena and keeping the sensitive material.
Arguably, once DOJ got involved, that was the point of no return. If the documents are classified or national defense information, then the Presidential Records Act simply may not provide any protections to anybody who takes those documents and holds on to them and even conceals them.
Many legal experts say that if Mr. Trump had handed those documents back when the archives asked, it's unlikely he'd be facing any charges at all. Coming up here on the show, thousands of people have already been forced to evacuate in the Philippines because of that volcano we told you about. Now, officials think the eruption could last even longer. That's later in the Global. Plus, why a bunch of Oakland A's fans are staging a very different kind of boycott. That's coming up in tonight's local original. So tonight's original now with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been watching. And tonight it's the Oakland A's, who may not be the Oakland A's for much longer. That's because lawmakers in Nevada want to draw the A's down to Vegas. They want to give them millions of dollars for a stadium there. This decision is in the hands of the Nevada Assembly right now. The state Senate passed it just overnight. The Republican governor says he'd sign it. You can imagine that news has been devastating to fans in Oakland. The team's home for 5 decades. We've seen protests all season at the stadium there. The A's attendance has plummeted nearly as fast as the team's historically bad start to the season because of that kind of fan boycott. But for one night, a passionate group of fans wanted to show they care and that they want their team to stay. So they planned a very different kind of boycott. Jake Ward has the story.
It's Tuesday night, usually a slow day for baseball, especially in Oakland. But something strange is going on. The deafening chants of 28,000 fans fill the Oakland Coliseum. All to see a last-place team. Why? Well, because the owners of the A's want to leave Oakland, announcing they plan to abandon the city after 55 years for Las Vegas. The team says they're losing money because fans don't show up. Fans say they're not the problem. The team's doubled ticket prices and traded away beloved players. So they've organized something unusual, a reverse boycott.
Why show up in big numbers when they've done so little for you?
It's just a reminder of, like, how it used to be, you know. So we've been here, we continue to be here. It's just that we're just trying to create a playoff vibe, and anytime that Coliseum is packed, it rumbles like no other stadium in the world.
When high school baseball coach Stu Clary was 10 years old, the A's were World Series champions, sure, but they were irresistible for other reasons.
They dressed in green and gold while everyone else wore white and gray. They had mustaches when everyone else was clean shaven. There was stories of them fighting each other in the clubhouse.
Then there's the ballpark. A new analysis by a sports betting website shows baseball fans consider the Oakland Coliseum the worst in baseball. But years of negotiating with the city for a new site have failed. Oakland's mayor says in the future, no city will be able to afford the old way of attracting a sports team.
At the end of the day, you know, we have to come together and have true partnership. These stadiums cannot be financially backed 100%, 120% by cities. It can't work that way anymore.
She's referring to the $380 million in taxpayer money that Nevada could give the A's. Mayor Tao says she can't see the logic of it.
The A's had proposed a 55-acre ballpark with thousands of units of housing, retail, and restaurants. And we were very close to that deal, and I believe we can get there in short order. And in Las Vegas, they're only proposing a ballpark, just 9 acres for the stadium and no additional development. If that's what they need in Oakland, we can make that work too, of course.
Neither the A's nor Major League Baseball responded to our request for comment. But what is the business case for this move? There's no guarantee fans will come. Just look at the last team to move to Vegas.
The Raiders, we saw that they regressed from a couple of good years, and now they're middle of the pack as well.
And Oakland is the 10th largest media market in the nation. Las Vegas is 40th. But here's one potential factor: gambling.
Maybe baseball feels like it wants to be close to one of its largest sponsors in MGM.
The reverse boycotters hope this display of fan loyalty will catch the attention of Major League Baseball and convince them to reject a move. Because if old-fashioned fan loyalty isn't enough to keep a team in town, organizers say, no team is safe.
If it can happen to the Oakland A's, the historic Oakland A's, charter member of the American League, 9-time World Series champions, home of countless baseball icons like Reggie Jackson and Rickey Henderson, then it can happen to any other team.
Jake Ward, NBC News.
By the way, the A's won that game 2-1 against the Tampa Bay Rays. That's Oakland's 7th straight win, meaning now they are no longer the worst team in baseball. NBC News covers hundreds of international stories every day. And because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our foreign desk has done it for you. Here's some of what they're watching in a segment we call The Global. Out of Italy, the former head of the country, Silvio Berlusconi, was honored today with a state funeral in Milan at the Duomo Cathedral, with thousands of people gathering to pay their respects. Some Italians are divided over whether Berlusconi, the country's longest-serving premier, left a positive or negative legacy. We told you how he's been accused of corruption and paying for sex. He died Monday at the age of 86. Out of the Philippines, an update on that eruption from a volcano we've talked about. 18,000 people now have had to leave their homes, and it could be months before anybody can go back. That is what we found out from officials today, as the president of the Philippines passed out food and other help to people who have been displaced. And this just in, you can no longer go to hell on bus 666. Hell, H-E-L in Poland. 666 being a number that people associate with the devil. The local bus operator says that tourists take this trip a lot. That's like a real thing. They get on this bus, they go to this town called Hell. They've been hit with protests, so they are changing the bus number. It will now be 669. Good luck on your journey. Time now to get the backstory, our behind-the-scenes look at how a story comes together and how it fits into our bigger picture. And tonight we are taking a look at this, the first time a TV crew has ever done a live shot from underwater inside a shark tank with 15 sharks at the Georgia Aquarium in Atlanta. That, friends, is our very own Tom Costello, trying to find out more about how to keep your distance when you head to the beach this summer and how to avoid an attack. Unlikely, very unlikely, though that may be. It's in the news. So Tom went to go report it out. He talked about it in an exclusive conversation with Dr. Katie Lyons, a shark researcher and Tom's personal underwater guide. Look at this.
Yeah, so we have 5 different species of shark. So the ones with the big, tall dorsal fin. Oh, just right there. Look to your right.
Yep, I see it. Oh, my gosh. This is just a phenomenal experience to see these sharks up close.
Yeah. It's super cool. I mean, it's, again, a completely different perspective that you get being here underwater with them.
Different perspective indeed. Tom is joining me now. Tom, we're so glad you're back. Welcome home. You know, in the interest of this segment, which is all about a behind-the-scenes look, you got to take us behind the scenes because this is a logistic and technical feat to be able to pull this off. You were good to go for like 2 hours, and I hear that like 8 minutes before your live shot on the Today Show, everything fell apart.
Oh, it was closer than that, actually. Wow. By the way, I still got the water in my ears.
Sure you do.
So literally in the commercial break before they come to me, suddenly my cameraman is going like this. He's underwater with me, right? Something is clearly wrong. Oh, he's lost the camera signal. His batteries have died. Oh my gosh, what do we do? We're underwater.
But of course, you've been there for 3 hours, ready to go. And of course,
it's crazy. It always happens like this. So they literally were in this pool with 15 sharks circling, and they bring a guy in a raft who's like canoeing out, or coming out to us with batteries, and my photographer has got his head above water.
Swim up now.
Hands him the camera, puts in new batteries. They bring it back down below the water, and then. Thank goodness, just in the nick of time, Tom's live in Atlanta.
Wow, which is so stressful. And by the way, you're doing it all, as you say, with a dozen-plus sharks. Like
I'm going to be precise here. 15 sharks.
And you felt good about that? Like you were cool
listen, it was a phenomenal experience. And you can see that the cage itself is stainless steel and plexiglass.
Was your producer, Jay Blackman, in there with you?
He was in there with us last week, not today. Today it was pretty much me and the safety diver and the photographer. Incredible experience, though, to see these animals up close, the predators of I mean, they are truly incredible species.
Because this is about how a story comes together, people, I think, are used to seeing you talk about the economy, talking about you, as you point out, you hunted for Russian subs this year, right? Now, here you are hanging with sharks in kind of a beach safety feature. How do you end up, and I'm not asking for personal reasons, but how do you end up assigned to a story like this?
So in this case, Jay Blackman, my producer, had been talking to that aquarium for a long time because he had been there before.
About this, which is
other cool stuff, right? But they said, hey, we've now got the technology. They called him up. We've got the technology. Would you ever want to do a live shot underneath the water, live on TV? So we're not just talking about going down and interviewing somebody. We've now got to create the communication.
You at IFB
underwater, this thing that we have, right? You have the communication all the way up to New York. They've got to hear you. I got to hear them live on the Today Show. It's a massive technical challenge. But they pulled it off. It took a lot of work.
I bet it did. And kudos to the team. And in some ways, kind of a nod to one of our beloved colleagues who has since gone on to his happy retirement. I think of scuba diving. I think of Carrie and those live shots and him doing all these different kinds of things. You actually chatted with him a bit right before this dive.
I called Carrie. Well, Carrie and I are dear friends. And, of course, he's the guy who knows everything about wildlife, especially going into the water. And I was talking to him the night before, last night, in the hotel. And he said, oh, I did that already. I've already done that
There's
live.
Carrie now. We're showing some shots
wait a minute. You've done this already? You were in this particular tank with the sharks? Well, not so much. It was a whale shark. Okay, but I've got 15 sharks. I said, that was a goldfish compared to what I got. Anyway, he's a dear friend, and he's taught me a lot. So he's now retired, and he can look on with envy, but it was a great trip.
That is so fun. Tom Costello, we appreciate you. Thank you for really giving us a behind-the-scenes look at how it went down.
You bet. By the way, go to my Twitter feed if you want to watch the whole story.
Get that plug in, man. You
can
better.
watch the whole story on my Twitter feed.
We'll pop up a thing. Thank you, Tom. Still to come, after something like 20 years, America's once top-selling beer no longer #1. We'll tell you what took its place and why. So tonight, for the first time in more than 20 years, Bud Light can no longer say it's the best-selling beer in the country, because it is not. Not any longer. This beer is Modelo Especial. Look at the chart. You can see Bud Light sales have gone down since March. Modelo, in red, it's gone up in that same time frame. Bud Light sales are down like 24% in just the last few weeks. It all started happening. What do you think? March? Well, what happened in March? This, right? Bud Light partnering with a trans influencer, Dylan Mulvaney, one of many influencers Bud Light partnered with to promote March Madness in this marketing campaign. There was huge conservative backlash. People were like boycotting the beer. They were posting on social media, running it over, dumping it out, etc., crushing cans, shooting at them even. And that has led Bud Light to where it is now. Investopedia editor-in-chief Caleb Silver, our business guru, is joining us now. Let's start on the business end of it here. What did Bud Light do wrong in responding to what was clearly a bit of a marketing crisis? Not a bit of a marketing crisis, a crisis that turned into a business crisis for them.
Yeah, kind of responding, but not responding. The CEO was out with a statement not long after this that said, we never intended to be part of a discussion that divides people. We're in the business of bringing people together over a beer. He wasn't really thinking long-term about the business effects because sales have declined precipitously since that campaign started. And it was a small online campaign. We're not talking, Hallie, about a Super Bowl commercial. We're talking about an online campaign with an influencer. But the stock also down 15% since that incident, wiping billions of dollars in market value off of Anheuser-Busch, the parent company of Bud Light.
Why Modelo? You know, we've been talking, I gotta tell you, just pulling back the curtain, we've been talking about this like with our show staff like all day, because I'm like not a beer drinker. I don't see a lot of people. Half my team is like, oh yeah, everybody that I was with, we're all drinking Modelo at this bar or that place or whatever. Like, what's up with that? What is driving that popularity?
Yeah, well, Modelo is part of the Modelo group. So that's Pacifico, that's Negro Modelo, that's Modelo Reserva. They have a lot of beers in that group. It's a very affordable beer, pretty delicious beer, if you ask me, but also a very straight and narrow marketing campaign. They don't wander into social issues. That marketing campaign's been very consistent. They have a lot of beers on the market. They have a growing demographic of people who like their beers and the variety of beers. So it's taken advantage of it. And just to put things into perspective, Bud and Bud Light, and especially Bud Light, have been the top-selling beers for 20 years, but lately in the past few years, you have seen other beers, especially from Modelo and the Constellation brands, move up in terms of sales and the erosion of Bud and Bud Light's sort of dominance over the beer market.
Is there anything that Bud can do to get its sort of crown, metaphorically, back?
Well, they've been running ad campaigns that are more about country music and more about Americana and football lately, but I think that this one hasn't gone away. Usually these types of things blow over after a few days, especially in the social media universe that we live in. Something else takes its place. This has had staying power. This has happened at the end of March, and we've seen, again, the stock down 15%, sales declining some 24%. So I don't know how or when this ends. It's surprising that it's gone on this long, but it's become a real business problem for Anheuser-Busch.
With your business hat on, what do you think other companies are taking away from this?
Stay away from issues like this that do divide people. Do what you're good at, sell beer.
Caleb Silver, Investopedia editor-in-chief. Caleb, thank you, as always, for being with us. It is great to see you. It is great to see all of you as we are back home now here in Washington. That does it for us for this hour and for the one before it. If you missed any of it, catch up on the latest reporting and the newest interviews from our team. You can find us anytime in so many places: Peacock, Hulu, YouTube, and more. Just search Hallie Jackson now. We've got lots more for you tomorrow night, including another original, a topic you will not want to miss on the climate crisis and what this heat wave we've been seeing could mean for other parts of the country, too. That plus more backstory, more politics. We'll see you then tomorrow night. Top Story picks up our coverage right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.